Welcome. In this lesson, we're going to chat about why some type of version control is important and what's so great about Git. Of course, if you don't need convincing, feel free to skip ahead to the next lecture. First, let's talk about version control. I know. It's not the most exciting topic in the world. Well, at least until you lose 6 months' worth of source files, especially coupled with rather fragile computing systems. It doesn't take much to lose everything. Today, while computing resources have become more reliable, the need for version control hasn't gone away. Complete system meltdowns still happen, and these days we have to worry about hackers and viruses, or even just disgruntled or careless employees. In addition to being a backup of your source code, most version control systems also provide revision or history management for your code. That means you can return to the version of a source file as of 3 weeks ago, or even just compare changes from a few hours ago. Today, knowledge of a source control tool is a critical developer skill. Okay, let's assume you're on board with the source control management tool concept. How do you pick one? Of course, if you're watching a course about Git, naturally, I'll tell you that Git is super awesome, like a rainbow farting unicorn. Yes, I'll get to that in a minute. You need to decide what you and your team's criteria is for the correct source control tool in your case. These days, there are really two major source control camps: centralized and decentralized. It's actually a bit more murky than that, but let's keep things simple for now. Centralized simply means the ultimate source of truth, that is, the master copy of the source code, resides on a centralized server. That centralized server is normally on a computer system running the version control server software located within your company. Nowadays, that centralized server can also be located somewhere on the internet. It just depends on which versioning service you're using. The downside of many of these centralized version control systems is the dependence on the network when performing any real work. Normally, you would need to check out a file, which is downloaded and saved locally, and then when you're done making changes, you need to check in that file, which uploads the changed file back to the centralized server. If that file remains on your local system, many times that file is locked or set to a read-only status, so you can't make changes to that file without the awareness and management of the central system. This centralized approach had been the primary version control methodology until recently. Today, an alternative called decentralized or distributed version control systems are the norm, with Git leading the way. The decentralized approach promotes each repository to first-class status. That is, they are all basically the same. There is no golden copy concept enforced. For example, you could have a network of 5 repositories, one for each developer on your team, with no dedicated gatekeeper. In order to make this magic happen, each copy of the source code repository contains the full history, all files, and revisions from the beginning of time. A neat side benefit of this is most distributed source control systems allow for offline work, and by extension, most local versions of files are not locked down. As I mentioned before, a decentralized or distributed version control system doesn't enforce a central repository. However, in practice, most teams elect a repository as the main or golden copy, usually on some type of source control hosting provider, like GitHub. You might think of it as decentralized in denial. Git is a decentralized or distributed version control system, like mentioned before. Because of the distributed nature, Git can scale massively. For example, the creator of Git, Linus Torvalds, wanted to create a version control system that could handle the requirements of the Linux kernel project, which he also created. Today, the Linux kernel project contains over 15 million lines of code, with over 1,200 worldwide developers contributing to the project in dozens of active branches. Another benefit of being distributed is that most operations in Git are local. There are only a few commands that require a network connection. Otherwise, the work can be done completely disconnected, even performing comparisons and commits completely off the network. When you are ready, you can synchronize your changes by using your network or internet connection. Since most operations are local, Git is very fast for those same operations. Git is free and open source, which also contributes to its popularity. This has led to a massive online community with tons of free and paid training and learning materials available. Because of the massive community around Git, it's easy to find existing developers that already have at least some experience with Git. In fact, not having Git on your resume can seriously hold you back in your career these days. Because of all of these factors, Git has become the most popular version control system. Git is basically the de facto standard in version control. That's not saying that Git is the best version control out there, or even if it's the right fit for your team or project. Because of all the above factors, I recommend looking at Git first. Then consider other options if the Git ecosystem isn't able to meet your needs. Finally, let's talk about GitHub. It's easy to confuse Git and GitHub. Perhaps you think of them as the same thing. However, GitHub is an online hosting provider for Git repositories and related services. Any repository hosted on GitHub is a true Git repository. However, GitHub also provides several web-based tools and utilities that make managing those repositories very easy. GitHub isn't the only Git hosting provider. There are several others, like Bitbucket and GitLab. Each hosting service has their own strengths and weaknesses. Most have some type of free account tier or trial period, and each one has their own business model in order to sustain their services by charging a licensing fee for those that need more features or official support. To recap the differences, Git is the source control tool itself, and GitHub is an online hosting provider for storing Git repositories that is often used as a semi-centralized or main copy for the codebase.